I don't know if you'll believe me. Hell, I didn't believe in myself at first. But when you're stuck in a place like that, and the air turns cold and everything goes silent, you start questioning things. I don't know if I can explain it all, but I'll try. I was just a kid when I moved to that village. It was a tiny, isolated little spot in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place most people drive right past without a second thought. The village was surrounded by the thickest forest I'd ever seen. And believe me, I'd seen some forests. The trees went on for miles, stretching in every direction like some unending sea of green. It always felt like the forest was watching, like it was alive. Maybe it is. Maybe that's why the people there were so different. You could feel the weight of the silence in the air. No birds, no animals, nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of the trees. I'd never seen a place like it. And to be honest, I hated it at first. The people there were friendly enough, but they kept their distance. They'd always say the same thing. It's safe here, as long as you follow the rules. And what were those rules? Well, that's where things get interesting. The most important rule, the one everyone drilled into my head, was the curfew. No one was allowed out of their house once the sun set, not a soul. I'd heard rumors about the forest after dark, about things in the woods that no one spoke about openly. At first, I thought it was just superstition. You know how small towns are. People love their stories and ghost tales. But there was something about the way they said it that made me uneasy. The way their eyes would dart around, as if they were waiting for something to hear them. Or worse, waiting for something to notice. The rule was simple. Don't break curfew and you'll be fine. There was something deeper in that warning though, something they weren't saying. And I felt it every time the sun started to set, like the whole village went into lockdown. People rushed inside their homes, closing every door and window with a level of urgency that made my skin crawl. And then, the silence would come. I could never shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the tree line, watching. I remember the first time I thought about breaking the rule. It was just after I'd settled in, gotten used to the quiet. I was still a little annoyed by the curfew. It seemed so restrictive, so unnecessary. The sun was just about to dip behind the trees, and I found myself standing at the edge of the village, staring out into the darkening forest. It felt like a challenge. The whole village lived their lives by that rule. What would happen if I ignored it? Just for a moment, just to see what would happen. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment, that tiny act of rebellion, would change everything. I was young, too curious for my own good. And as the orange glow of the setting sun bathed the village, something in me snapped. Maybe it was the boredom, maybe it was the strange energy of the place. But before I could stop myself, I took a step forward, away from the safety of the village and into the shadow of the trees. That was the first mistake I made. As soon as my foot hit the ground outside the village, I felt the temperature drop. It wasn't gradual, like the sun just setting. No, it was sudden, like someone had flipped a switch. The air thickened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A strange stillness fell over the village, as if everything was waiting, watching. I don't know why I didn't turn back. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was curiosity, but I kept walking. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, and the deeper I went into the woods, the more the silence pressed in on me. And that's when I heard it. A faint whispering. Just barely audible, like the wind moving through the trees. But it wasn't wind. It was too intentional. It sounded like voices, low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all directions. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. There was something out there, something I couldn't see. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. I spun around, heart racing. The whispering stopped. The trees swayed, but there was no wind. Then I saw it. Something dark moved in the shadows just beyond my line of sight. A shape, a figure. It was hard to tell exactly what it was. Too quick, too fleeting, but I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. I wasn't supposed to be there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I turned, running back towards the village as fast as I could. The sounds behind me, footsteps, branches cracking, grew louder and louder. I dared not look back. I couldn't. The terror in my chest was blinding. My legs burned, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I made it back to the village, but I wasn't sure I'd escaped. The village wasn't the safe haven I thought it would be. No, it was part of the trap. As I stumbled into the streets, I could hear the doors slamming shut behind me, the windows locking. The villagers were already inside, already hidden, safe, like they always had been. But I wasn't safe anymore. Something had followed me back. I knew then the curfew wasn't just a rule. It was a warning.
The next day, I was shaken, no doubt about it. I couldn't sleep that night, not after what I saw, or what I thought I saw. It felt like my mind was playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched, of something just beyond my reach, never left. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I had just gotten spooked in the dark, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The village seemed normal enough the next morning. The streets were empty, the air still as thick as ever. The sun was up high, and for a moment, I almost forgot about what happened. The normalcy of the village was enough to almost convince me that nothing was wrong. But then I noticed the subtle signs, the little things that when pieced together would make everything seem far worse. The first one came when I went to the market. The older villagers, the ones who'd lived here longer than I had, gave me strange looks. It was almost like they were judging me, but not in an obvious way. More like they were trying to figure out how much they should warn me. When I reached the vendor to buy some bread, the old man behind the counter barely met my eyes. His hands were shaking as he wrapped the loaf for me, his voice low and quiet. "You should stay inside tonight," he said, almost too softly for me to hear. "The forest, it's not the same after dark, not anymore." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Was he warning me about something, or was he just old and senile? But then his eyes darted around quickly, and he lowered his voice, just barely audible. "Don't break curfew. I saw what happened to the last one who did." He didn't say more, but I felt that familiar unease creeping up my spine again. I thanked him quickly, eager to get away from the intense look in his eyes. Later that day, I began noticing more of the same. The villagers seemed to be acting differently. The shutters on their windows were locked tighter than usual. The streets, which would normally be filled with people going about their business, were eerily empty. No children playing, no groups chatting on the corners. There was just this stillness. I bumped into Mrs. Wren, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. She had a cane, and her steps were slow but deliberate. As I approached, she met my eyes, her gaze piercing. "You went out last night," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. I froze. How did she know? I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come out. I didn't even know what to say. She must have seen me, but how could she? I had been so careful, so quiet as I slipped past the village boundary. But her eyes, there was no mistaking that knowing look. She had seen me. "Don't make the same mistake again," she warned me, her voice low and grave. "The forest, it's not just trees and dirt. You're not the first to get curious." She didn't wait for a response. She just turned and hobbled off, leaving me standing there, her words hanging in the air like a cold breeze. I wanted to dismiss her as just another old woman who had nothing better to do than gossip, but something in her tone, in the weight of what she had said, made me reconsider. The rest of the day was filled with strange, offbeat interactions. The villagers were all polite, but there was a hesitation in their eyes, like they were too afraid to speak too openly, as if saying too much would somehow break the silence. The whole town felt like it was on the edge of something, waiting for the sun to dip below the trees. That evening, I went for a walk along the perimeter of the village, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my gut. The sun was starting to set, casting long, creeping shadows across the ground. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The woods seemed closer. The trees, tall and imposing, seemed to press in from the edges of the village, like they were moving forward, as if they were alive, like they were watching, waiting. By the time the sun was just a sliver on the horizon, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned around and headed back home, but as I did, I swore I heard something. A low, soft whisper, like the wind, but it wasn't. I knew that much. It was coming from the woods, and it wasn't a voice I recognized. I picked up the pace, my heart racing, but when I looked back, there was nothing there. No shadow, no movement, just the trees, standing still like they always did. It wasn't until I got back to the village that I started feeling the full weight of what had been happening. As I approached my house, I saw several of my neighbors gathered at the corner. They were talking in hushed tones, but as I neared, the conversation stopped abruptly. They all turned to face me, their expressions unreadable. And then, one of them, Mrs. Dalton, the village's unofficial leader, stepped forward. "You've been out past curfew, haven't you?" I asked, my voice cold.
That night, I couldn't sleep. The village felt different. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside felt amplified. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. I kept thinking about Mrs. Dalton's warning. "People who break curfew don't come back the same," she said. I couldn't shake the thought. What if it wasn't just an old wives' tale? What if it was true? I tossed and turned in my bed, the sound of the wind howling outside my window, the trees scraping against the house. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to go out there. The curiosity gnawed at me. The village was so small, so locked down. There had to be more to it. I couldn't stay inside forever, could I? The thought of it made me restless. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly dusk. The sun was already sinking behind the forest, casting long shadows across the room. Something in me stirred, something darker than before. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that the village was just a place like any other. Maybe the stories were just that. Stories. I tried to ignore the nagging voice in my head, the one telling me not to go, not to break the rules. But that voice felt small, distant. It was drowned out by the call of the unknown. The moment the sun disappeared completely behind the trees, I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the door, quietly, careful not to alert anyone. I didn't want to be stopped. I needed to know what was out there. The air felt thick as I stepped outside. It wasn't cold, no, it was warmer than it should have been for a fall evening, but there was something wrong with the warmth. It felt suffocating, like the air was too dense, too heavy, with something I couldn't put my finger on. My breath was shallow as I made my way toward the edge of the village, the trees looming just beyond the small cottages. I should have turned back right then. The instinct to run was stronger than ever, but I couldn't. Something was pulling me forward, a strange compulsion I couldn't explain. The moment my foot crossed the line where the village ended, the silence hit me. It wasn't just quiet, it was an unnatural silence, the kind that presses in on you and makes every movement feel too loud. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at the village. All the houses were dark now, the windows blacked out. I wondered if anyone was watching, if anyone knew what I was doing. A soft rustling in the trees broke the stillness, and I jumped.
My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep walking. Every step felt heavier. The whispering in the air was back, but this time it was clearer. It sounded like voices, too soft to make out, but unmistakably there. I stopped, straining to hear, but there was nothing. The trees were still, the air eerily still. I didn't realize it at first, but the ground beneath me had changed. The dirt was soft and moist, like the earth had been disturbed, but it was impossible to see what had caused it. I shifted my weight and felt something shift under my foot, like the ground itself was alive. I took another step, then froze. The whispering came again, closer now. I turned, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Nothing but trees, their twisted, gnarled branches reeking up like skeletal hands. The darkness seemed to grow deeper, as though the shadows themselves were moving. My instinct screamed at me to turn around and run back to the village, but I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring into the blackness of the forest. It felt like something was watching me from just beyond the trees, something unseen, but not unknown. I could feel it pressing on me, suffocating me. Then I heard it. A snap of a twig. The sound was sharp in the silence, and I whipped around, my pulse racing. There it was again, a figure, just outside the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it clearly. A shape, dark and twisted, standing perfectly still. My heart thudded in my chest as I took a step back. My legs were shaking, but I couldn't move fast enough. The shape was growing closer, not walking, but gliding. It was the way it moved that made my skin crawl, the unnatural, jerky motions that seemed almost like a glitch in the world. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I recognized. The shape seemed to ripple, like a shadow that was trying to take form but couldn't. It had no clear features, just a dark shape with elongated limbs, too long and too thin. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle, as though it was watching me with eyes that shouldn't have been there. But I couldn't look away. I couldn't make myself move. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. The shape advanced, and I felt the air around me grow colder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl. It came from deep within the creature or from something inside the trees. It was the sound of something that shouldn't exist, something that should have never been created. A noise so wrong, so terrifying that it stopped my heart. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The trees closed in around me, their branches seeming to reach out, grabbing at my coat, tugging at my hair. I ran blindly, not caring about the pain in my legs or the fear that clouded my mind. I just needed to get back to the village. I needed to get away. As I sprinted toward the edge of the trees, I heard the unmistakable sound of something chasing me. Footsteps that weren't mine, heavy, dragging footsteps, like something struggling to keep up, but getting closer every second. The growling followed me, echoing through the woods. I didn't know how I made it back to the village. My body moved on pure instinct, every step a fight to survive. I reached the boundary of the village, gasping for air, and didn't stop until I was inside the safety of my home. The moment I slammed the door shut, everything went still. The footsteps, the growling, the whispers, they all vanished, as if they had never been there. But the terror in my chest, the cold sweat on my skin, they were real, and they wouldn't go away. Not ever. I had broken the rule, and now, whatever was in that forest, whatever had been watching me, would follow me.
The night dragged on, but sleep was impossible. I stayed awake, my mind racing, heart pounding in my chest. What had I seen? What had chased me back to the village? I couldn't make sense of it, but one thing was clear. I wasn't safe. Not anymore. It was only when the first light of dawn crept through my window that I finally collapsed from exhaustion.
I slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of dark shapes and twisted trees. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the figure, gliding through the forest, watching me from the shadows. I woke up more than once, drenched in sweat, my body frozen with fear. I didn't know what I had unleashed, but I knew it wasn't over. When I woke up, the village seemed eerily calm, but I knew better than to trust it. The silence from the night before lingered, like a cloud hanging over everything. The village was still, too still. No children playing, no conversations in the streets. People kept their doors and windows locked tight, as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure if I could keep my secret any longer. The villagers had to know something. They had to have some idea of what was going on. I needed answers. The curiosity gnawed at me again, stronger this time. I had to find out what I had stumbled into. I went to the only person I thought might have answers, Old Man Barrett. He was one of the oldest residents of the village, living in a creaky house on the outskirts. People whispered about him, said he had lived through more than anyone else. He was a relic of a time long past, and his words were always taken seriously. If anyone knew what was happening, it was him. The air was thick as I walked to his house, my footsteps heavy on the dirt road. As I neared his house, I could feel my heart start to race again. The trees loomed on either side of the path, casting long shadows over me. I didn't want to look back, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, the same feeling from the night before creeping up my spine. Something was watching me. I knocked on the door of Old Man Barrett's house, my knuckles shaking. A long moment passed before I heard a shuffle from inside. The door creaked open, revealing Barrett standing in the dim light of his entryway. His face was wrinkled, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. But it was his gaze that struck me, the way he looked at me, as if he already knew why I was there. "You're the one who went out after dark, aren't you?" His voice was gravelly, but there was no anger in it, just a quiet, resigned sadness. I nodded, heart looking away. I need to know what's going on. What's in the woods? What is that thing I saw? Barrett stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. His house smelled of wood smoke and something else, like earthy, like decaying leaves. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, cluttered with books and strange objects. It looked like a library more than a home. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, feeling the weight of his eyes on me the whole time. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind outside, rustling through the trees. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Barrett asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "What is it? What is it that's out there?" Barrett sighed deeply and lowered himself into the chair across from me. His eyes seemed to cloud over, as though he was seeing something far away, something in the past. "It's not a thing, not really. It's something that's been here longer than any of us, longer than the village itself. It's tied to the forest. No, the forest is tied to it. They're one and the same." I leaned forward, hanging on every word. "What do you mean?" "The forest is alive," he said quietly. "It's not just trees and plants. It's something older, something that feeds off the darkness, off fear. And when the sun sets, it wakes. The thing you saw," he paused, as if considering his next words carefully, "it's one of the creatures it sends out. It's part of the forest, part of its hunger." I felt a chill run through me. "Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Barrett's eyes were grim as he shook his head. We can't tell people what happens, not unless they're ready to know, and most never are.
I didn't understand. I had so many questions, but I could feel them slipping away like sand through my fingers. So, the rule, the curfew, why? Ah, the curfew, he muttered, rubbing his temple. It's not just to keep people inside, it's to keep the bargain. You see, the forest demands a tribute. Every year, someone must be marked. Someone must step out of line, and that keeps the rest of us safe. I stared at him in disbelief. You're telling me the curfew is a bargain with the forest? Barrett nodded slowly. Yes, it's the price of survival. The forest lets us live, as long as we obey the rule. Break the rule, and it takes what it wants. It has a hunger that can never be satisfied. I couldn't process it. The weight of his words settled on me like a heavy stone. Everything I thought I knew about the village, about the world, was wrong. And the creature I saw? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What happens to people like me, people who break the rule? Barrett's face grew darker as he shook his head. The creature is only the beginning. Once it marks you, once it has you in its sights, there's no escaping. It will chase you. It will hunt you. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding. I had to leave. I couldn't sit there anymore, couldn't hear any more of this madness. So what do I do? How do I get out? You don't, Barrett said simply. There's no running from it. You can't escape, not once you've been marked. A cold dread settled in my chest. The fear that had been building for days suddenly rushed over me in a tidal wave. I was trapped. There was no escape from the forest, no escape from whatever it was that had marked me. I backed towards the door, my mind racing. So what happens now? Barrett looked up at me, his face filled with sorrow. Now, you wait. Wait for what? He didn't answer. Instead, he simply closed the door behind me with a soft click, leaving me alone in the darkness. And that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside, slowly, deliberately, like it was waiting for me to come back out. I didn't dare look, but I knew, deep down, that whatever it was had never really left, and now it was getting closer. You said.
I don't know what I expected when I left Barrett's house. Some part of me had hoped that the old man was just a crazy hermit, that his warnings were nothing more than the ramblings of someone who'd lived alone for too long. But everything he said, it made too much sense. There was no way to deny it. The footsteps outside were still there, slow and deliberate. I could feel them closing in, echoing in the silence of the village. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood frozen on Barrett's porch, unable to move. The sound grew louder, closer, like whatever was out there was circling, waiting for me to make a move. I couldn't stay here, not anymore. But where could I go? The village was too small, too trapped in its own rules. The forest, the thing in the woods, it had claimed its first victim long ago, and now it was after me. The moment I broke curfew, I sealed my fate. I turned and ran. I didn't look back as I sprinted down the narrow streets of the village, my legs burning with every step. The houses, the people inside them, the locked doors, all of it felt like a prison, a cage, one I couldn't escape. The forest pressed in on all sides, its dark branches reaching out like hungry hands. But I didn't dare go back. There was no way I could. I made it to my house and locked the door behind me, feeling the weight of the lock click into place. But even that didn't bring me comfort. The house didn't feel safe anymore. The walls that had once been comforting, that had once felt like home, now felt cold, distant. I collapsed onto my bed, trying to catch my breath, but the room spun around me. I kept my eyes open, staring at the shadows on the walls, the corners of the room where the darkness seemed to gather and shift. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, waiting for me to fall asleep. But I was too afraid to close my eyes. The whispers from the woods were still fresh in my mind, the sounds of the thing that had chased me back to the village. I wanted to call out to someone, anyone. But who could I trust? The villagers? They all knew what was out there. They'd lived with it for years, accepting the forest's rules as if they were just part of life. But I couldn't live like that. I couldn't just sit and wait for it to take me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how hopeless it was. Even if I wanted to leave, where could I go? The forest surrounded the village, its vast expanse stretching far beyond what anyone could see. There was no escape. I lay in bed, wide awake, and time dragged on. I couldn't feel safe. I couldn't feel secure. There was only the growing sense of dread that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. Every sound outside the house felt amplified, as if the forest was listening, waiting. I didn't even hear the footsteps anymore, but I knew they were still out there, circling. It wasn't until later that night that things started to get worse. The first sign was the scratching on my window. It was soft at first, like a branch brushing against the glass, but then it became more insistent, more urgent. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't. I had to look. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked to the window. There, in the faint light of the moon, I saw the shadows. They were too long, too twisted to be branches. They moved in patterns, like they were trying to reach for something just inside the window. I jerked back, my heart racing. There was no wind, no storm. The trees weren't swaying. But something was out there, something that wasn't supposed to be. Then came the whispering. It was soft at first, like a voice carried on the wind, but it grew louder. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the urgency in it. It sounded like someone calling my name over and over again. But the voice was wrong. It wasn't the voice of anyone I knew. I backed away from the window, my breathing shallow. It felt like the house was closing in on me. The whispers were too close now, and they weren't coming from outside anymore. No, they were coming from inside the walls. The walls of the house creaked as if something was moving inside them. The air felt thick, suffocating. I could hear the low rumbling of the growl, distant but growing louder. It was the same sound that I had heard before, the one that came from the creature in the forest. Only now, it was inside. I tried to leave. I needed to get out, needed to run. But the door wouldn't open. It was locked, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked at the handle, my fingers slick with sweat, but it was like the door itself had grown heavier, like something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic rose in my chest as I backed away from the door, my mind racing. What was happening? Why was I still here? Why hadn't I just left when I had the chance? Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging across the floor, slow and steady. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to face whatever was in the room with me. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure I had seen in the woods. It was twisted and dark, a shadow that moved like it was part of the very air itself. Its eyes glowed faintly, but there was no face, just darkness. It was too tall, too unnaturally thin, its limbs stretched out at odd angles. It was barely human, a thing that should not exist. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing didn't move toward me, not at first. It just stood there, watching me, like it was studying me, like it knew me, like it had been waiting for this moment. The growl came again, this time louder. It felt like the room was closing in on me, like the walls were moving, bending with the weight of the thing that was inside.
And then, with a sound like snapping branches, the figure took a step forward. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the thing's eyes glowing with that faint, unnatural light. And then everything went silent. And I knew then that I had been marked.
When I came to, I was back in my bed. The room was the same, the air thick with the same tension that had plagued me for days. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it felt like hours, days, or even weeks. The walls were the same, but everything felt different now. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something irreversible. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my head spinning. The last thing I remembered was the creature in my room, the dark figure with glowing eyes, the twisted limbs, and then nothing. It was as though the world had shifted and I had slipped into a place I couldn't quite understand. I looked out the window. The village seemed quiet, just like it always was. The sun was rising, casting a dull light over the landscape, but there was an unnatural stillness in the air. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like everything was holding its breath. The village, the forest, the very ground I walked on, everything felt wrong. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same. And whatever had followed me, whatever had marked me, it wasn't done yet. Over the next few days, I did my best to pretend like nothing had changed. I went through the motions, ate, slept, interacted with the villagers, but it was impossible to shake the sense of dread that had settled in my chest. I couldn't look at anyone without wondering if they knew what I had done, if they knew what I had become. The villagers didn't speak to me the same way anymore. They were polite, of course, but there was an unmistakable wariness in their eyes. They avoided me. They always seemed to look over their shoulders, as if waiting for something. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me all the time. And at night, that's when it got worse. It started with the sounds. At first, they were subtle, just faint rustlings in the trees outside, the occasional scratching on my window. But they didn't stop. They never stopped. The sounds grew louder, more frequent, until I couldn't tell if they were outside or inside my head. The whispers, the footsteps, the dragging noises, they were always there, just beyond my reach. It was like the forest had a voice and it was speaking to me, beckoning me to come back. I didn't dare go outside after dark anymore. The creature in the woods wasn't the only thing out there. The whispers had returned, louder now, more urgent. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them, soft voices calling my name, calling me into the forest. It was as if something was trying to pull me in, to drag me back into the darkness. The villagers had warned me, but it wasn't just the creature I had to worry about. It was the forest itself, the hunger. The thing that had been waiting for me since the moment I had broken curfew. It wasn't just the sound that haunted me, it was the dreams. Every night I fell into a deep, restless sleep, only to be plagued by nightmares that felt all too real. In my dreams, I was always in the forest, always running, always looking over my shoulder. The trees seemed to shift, move in ways that weren't natural. They reached for me with long, twisted limbs, trying to drag me into their dark embrace. But the worst part? I could feel it watching me, always. I tried to talk to the villagers about it, but no one would listen. They just shake their heads, muttering about how the forest was never kind to those who broke the rules. They didn't seem surprised by what was happening to me. They expected it. It was like they'd all been waiting for it, waiting for the moment when I would realize that the forest never let go. But what could I do? The rules had been broken. There was no escaping it now. It wasn't just the forest that haunted me. It was the village itself. It was like the very air had changed. The once familiar streets now felt foreign, oppressive. I couldn't walk anywhere without feeling like someone or something was watching me. The villagers would look away when I passed, their faces filled with a mixture of pity and fear. They all knew what I had done, what I had become. I started to stay inside more often, avoiding the village altogether. I kept the windows closed, the curtains drawn, as if I could shut out the world. But it didn't help. It didn't stop the whispers. It didn't stop the scratching at the door. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was happening. I had to confront it, even if I didn't know how. I waited until the sun had set and the village had gone quiet. The whispers had started up again, softer this time, but still unmistakable. I couldn't resist the pull. I had to go outside. I slipped out the door, careful not to make any sound, and made my way toward the edge of the village where the forest met the clearing. The wind was still, the air thick with tension. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me as I stood there, just on the edge of the forest, staring into the abyss. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the overwhelming need to understand what had happened to me. But I stepped forward, just one step. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, like something stirring in the depths of the forest. It wasn't a sound I could describe, really. It was like a rumble, like the very earth was shifting beneath my feet. The sound echoed in my chest, vibrating through my bones. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then I saw it. Not the creature, but something else, something darker, something far worse. The trees, the very trees around me began to move, slowly at first, just a subtle shift in the shadows, but then they began to twist and writhe in their branches, stretching and bending in impossible ways. It was like the forest itself was alive, and it was reaching for me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And then I heard it again, that growl, closer now, followed by a soft whisper. "You've been marked." And that was when I realized the truth. The forest had never let me go. Not really. It had been waiting for this moment, and now it was coming for me.
I don't know what I expected when I heard the growl. I don't know what I thought would happen when I stood there, frozen, staring at the trees as they twisted and writhed in unnatural shapes. But I knew, deep down, that I wasn't going to get any answers standing there in the dark, staring at the forest. I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't just sit back and let whatever was coming for me win. I had to understand what was happening.
I had to prove that I wasn't just some victim in this strange, cursed place. So I made a decision. I was going to test the rules. After all, what did I have to lose? The villagers had warned me, sure. They told me about the curfew, about the hunger of the forest, and about the terrible price of breaking the rules. But none of them had truly shown me what happened when the rules were broken, what the forest would really do to you once it had marked you. I was already marked. That much was clear. But I wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. So over the next few nights, I began my experiments. I waited until the sun had set, until the village had fallen into its unnatural silence. The rules were clear. No one was supposed to be outside after dark. But I wasn't no one, was I? I had already broken the curfew once. What was one more time? I stepped outside, each night a little later than the last. At first, it was small things, standing just a few inches past the edge of the village, the line where the forest began. The whispers had started again, faint at first, like a distant murmur, but each time I pushed the boundaries, I heard them more clearly. The first time I stayed outside past sunset, nothing happened. I stood there, just on the edge of the trees, for what felt like hours. The night air was still, and the village was quiet. No footsteps followed me, no growl echoed in the distance. The whispers seemed quiet, as if the forest itself were watching me. I told myself that the old man Barrett had been wrong. The stories, the warnings, all of it had been exaggerated. This wasn't the same as the horror stories the villagers told. Maybe they were just afraid of the dark, afraid of what was beyond the tree line. Maybe the forest wasn't alive at all. Maybe it was just a bunch of trees. But then, the second night, something different happened. I stepped a little further into the woods. My heartbeat was steady, but my palms were slick with sweat. I had to know what was out there. I had to face the thing that had haunted my dreams, the thing that had stalked me, that had made the whispers in the dark. Maybe if I saw it again, I'd understand what it was. Maybe I could figure out how to get rid of it. The air felt different this time, though. Thicker, like it was pressing in on me. My steps seemed too loud, too heavy in the stillness of the woods. And then I heard it, the growl. Soft at first, a distant rumble in the air, like thunder rolling in from a faraway storm. I froze. The ground beneath me shifted slightly, like the earth itself was trying to tell me to leave. But I didn't. I couldn't. The pull was too strong. I took another step, then another. The whispers grew louder. Now I could hear them clearly. They weren't random. They were words, low and guttural, like something in the woods was speaking to me, urging me to come closer. My body tensed with fear, but my feet kept moving. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. And that's when it happened. A shape emerged from the trees, dark and indistinct, like a shadow formed by the night itself. It didn't move toward me directly, but it was close. Close enough that I could feel its presence, like it was brushing against the edges of my mind. I could sense its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. The figure shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, just a flicker of movement in the darkness. But before I could make sense of it, the whispers turned to a soft, almost musical chant. It was a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, a sound that felt wrong, like the forest itself was singing to me. I couldn't stay. I turned on my heel and ran. The forest seemed to close in behind me, the trees shifting, bending, their branches reaching out as if they were trying to trap me. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The growl followed me, growing louder with every step, like it was getting closer, gaining on me. I didn't dare turn around until I reached the village. I slammed the door shut behind me, gasping for air. I stood there for a moment, shaking, my heart thumping in my chest. I thought I was safe. I thought I had outrun whatever was out there. But then, I heard it. A soft knock at the door. I froze. My blood ran cold.
The knock came again, louder this time. 3 taps, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob, my mind screaming at me not to open it, not to look outside. But I couldn't help myself. I slowly turned the handle, and as the door creaked open, I saw it. Just beyond the threshold, in the darkness of the night, stood a figure. It was tall, thin, its limbs long and twisted. But this time, I could see its face, if you could call it a face. It was nothing but a blank, featureless void, as if the darkness itself had taken shape. Its eyes, those eyes glowed faintly like dying embers in a fire. The whispers grew louder, and the growl rumbled deep in the air. The thing stepped forward, and I could feel its presence in every part of my body. I was no longer just being watched. I was being hunted. And in that moment, I knew there was no escaping it. The forest had claimed me.
I thought I understood what had happened. I thought I had grasped the rules of the village, the warnings, the curfew. I thought the fear was just superstition, something meant to keep the villagers in line, to keep them safe. But I was wrong. I had no idea what I was dealing with. No idea at all. That night, as I stood there in the doorway, face to face with the thing that had been following me, I realized how deeply mistaken I had been. The forest, the rules, it wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about some creature that stalked the darkness. The truth was far darker than I could have ever imagined. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the thing in the doorway. Time felt like it had stopped. The world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to make a choice. The creature didn't move closer, didn't advance on me. It just stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on me, watching. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't waiting for me to make the first move. It was waiting for me to understand, to realize something that I had missed all this time. The growl, it wasn't just a warning. It wasn't just a sound meant to scare me. It was a reminder of the price I had paid for breaking the curfew, a reminder of the price everyone in the village had paid and would continue to pay as long as the forest was part of their lives. The forest itself wasn't just alive. It was a force of nature, a power far beyond anything the villagers had ever fully understood. It had always been there, waiting, watching, hungry. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the village wasn't just a place to live. It was a prison. The curfew, the rules, those weren't just ways to keep the villagers safe from the forest. They were part of an unspoken pact, a bargain. The forest required a tribute. Every year, someone had to be chosen. Someone had to break the rules. Someone had to step out of line. And once that person was chosen, there was no escape. The village had been living in this arrangement for generations, accepting the curfew as a way of life. But it wasn't a way of life. It was a prison, a carefully crafted illusion to keep the villagers safe. As long as they followed the rules, as long as they stayed inside at night, the forest wouldn't come for them. But the price was always the same. Someone had to be sacrificed. Someone had to break the rules. And that person, once marked, would never be free. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me as I stood there, facing the creature. I was the sacrifice now. I had broken the rule. I had been chosen. I didn't know how I knew it. Maybe it was the way the creature's eyes bored into me, or the way the shadows around it seemed to shift and move as if the very air was alive. Maybe it was the whispers in the wind, calling me to the forest, pulling me in. But I knew with sickening clarity that there was no escaping this. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind spinning. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I needed to leave. I needed to run, but I couldn't. The creature didn't move closer. It didn't advance on me. It just stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on me,
watching. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't waiting for me to make the first move. It was waiting for me to understand, to realize something that I had missed all this time. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, like the walls themselves were closing in. The whispers came again, but this time they weren't just voices. They were feelings. Cold, oppressive, suffocating. It was like the forest itself was inside my head, wrapping itself around my thoughts, filling me with its hunger. I stumbled toward the window, desperate for air, desperate for freedom. But the moment I reached the glass, I saw it again. The trees were moving. Not just swaying in the wind, but shifting, twisting, reaching. They weren't just trees anymore. They were alive. The branches stretched out, growing longer, growing closer, reaching for me, beckoning me to come back. I could hear them too, their voices, their calls, like a chorus of whispers from deep within the forest. The shadows in the trees began to swirl, coiling around each other like serpents, and I knew, without a doubt, that the forest was calling me. It was claiming me. I backed away from the window, my mind racing for an explanation, for a way out, but there was none. The forest had always been here, waiting. It had always been watching. And now, it had claimed me. I could feel the pull. The same pull I had felt that first night when I stepped out of the village and into the woods. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. They were coming from everywhere, from the very trees themselves. They were calling me back to the forest. I stumbled backward, my feet dragging across the floor, but there was nowhere to go. The forest had followed me inside. The darkness, the hunger, it was all around me now. And then I understood. The curfew wasn't just a rule. It was a cage. And once you were marked, once you had broken the rules, you couldn't escape. The forest would always come for you. The forest would always claim its tribute. And I had become that tribute.
I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. My mouth felt dry, and my chest was tight, as though the air itself had become too thick to breathe. The pharmacist had never truly let me go. It had only been waiting, watching, biding its time until I was far enough gone to begin the real hunt. The creature was still standing in my doorway, but its presence was no longer just physical. It had become part of the room, part of the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers, but they weren't just glowing. They were searching, probing. It was looking for something. It was looking for me. And the more I stood there, the more I realized that I was no longer just being hunted by it. I was being consumed, piece by piece, by everything that it represented. The creature didn't need to move. It didn't need to chase me. It was already in my mind. It had already taken root in my soul. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan my escape. I just bolted, not caring about the darkness that enveloped me. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know how to escape the village that had become my prison. But I had to leave. I had to get away from the thing that was hunting me, from the pull of the forest that was becoming unbearable. The streets were empty. No villagers, no movement. I ran past houses that felt like hollow shells, their windows dark, their doors sealed tight. It was like the whole village had vanished, as if they knew what was coming and they had already hidden themselves away. But there was nowhere to hide. Not anymore. I reached the edge of the village where the forest began. The trees seemed closer now, more oppressive. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect. It was unnatural, a silence that made my skin crawl. I turned back, expecting to see the creature following me, but there was no sign of it. No footsteps, no growls, just the quiet, endless rustle of the trees. But I knew it was there, in the shadows, watching. It didn't need to chase me, it didn't need to follow me. It knew I couldn't escape. The village, the forest, Everything had become one single unbreakable web, and I was the prey. I couldn't go back to the village, not now, not ever. So I stepped into the forest. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the world shifted, the air grew thick, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I could feel the forest watching me, the trees looming like sentinels, their gnarled limbs stretching toward the sky. And then I heard it, the whispering. It wasn't just the voices of the trees anymore. It wasn't just the forest itself calling to me. The whispers had changed. They were louder now, more insistent. They were my name, repeating over and over again, like a chant. And with every whisper, I could feel it, an overwhelming pressure, a weight that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I started walking deeper into the woods. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the pull of the whispers. Maybe it was the knowledge that there was nowhere else to go. But I moved forward, one step at a time, the forest swallowing me whole. The darkness grew thicker with every step. The trees were closer now, their trunks twisting in unnatural angles, their roots tangled and knotted, reaching out to trip me, to pull me deeper into their grasp. And then I saw it again, a shape, a flicker in the shadows. I didn't know what it was at first, but as it moved closer, I realized it was the creature. Its long, twisted limbs, its empty face with those glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. It was following me, but it wasn't chasing me. It was simply moving alongside me, keeping pace with every step I made. I could feel its presence, its cold, unfeeling gaze on me. It was inside my head, whispering to me, telling me that there was no escape. The forest had claimed me. The village had claimed me. I was part of it now. The growl rumbled in the distance again, low and deep, and I realized with a sickening certainty that it wasn't the creature alone. The forest was alive. It was all around me, in the trees, in the ground beneath my feet, in the very air I breathed. The hunger was everywhere. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight it. The forest was too vast, too powerful, and I had already broken its most sacred rule. The price of survival had already been paid, and I had become part of the forest's unyielding hunger. The whispers grew louder, the words clearer now. They said, "You belong to us," over and over again. "You belong to the forest. You are ours." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight back, but the words stuck in my throat. The creature, the darkness, the forest itself, it had already won. It had already taken me. And that's when I realized the truth. The thing that had been chasing me wasn't just the creature in the woods, it was the forest. The forest was alive, and it wasn't just feeding on the broken rules or the sacrifices, it was feeding on me. I had become part of the forest now. It had claimed me. There was no escape. The creature was still with me, moving just behind me, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating, but it wasn't the creature I feared anymore. No, it was the hunger of the forest itself, the darkness that had been waiting for me, that had been watching, listening, and waiting for the perfect moment to pull me in. And as I stumbled through the trees, my heart pounding, my breath ragged, I knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The forest had claimed me, and there was no escape. I was marked, and once you're marked by the forest, there's no escape. The hunt had begun. The forest felt different now, more oppressive than ever. Every step I took seemed to echo in the thick, suffocating air. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches creaking and groaning as if they were alive, as if they were watching me, waiting for the moment when I would finally break. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. I had no idea where I was. The familiar paths, the markers I had once relied on, had vanished. The forest had swallowed them up, and now everything felt wrong. The shadows were deeper, the air thicker, and the whispers in the trees had become deafening. I could feel them clawing at my mind, pulling me in, urging me to surrender, to accept the fate that the forest had already decided for me. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the darkness take me completely, not yet. The need to escape, no. To survive, still burned in my chest, but the more I pushed forward, the more I realized that the forest was not going to let me go. It was toying with me now, drawing me in like prey, playing with me before it made its final strike. It wasn't just the creature anymore. It wasn't just the twisted figure that had chased me, watched me, and hunted me. The forest had become something else entirely. It had become a presence, a force, a hunger that consumed everything in its path. It didn't need to chase me. It didn't need to hunt me the way I thought it did. It was everywhere now, inside me, around me, and there was no escaping it. I had become part of it. The moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. The path I had been following had long since faded, leaving only an endless expanse of dark woods ahead of me. I could hear the sound of my breath, ragged and shallow, but the sounds of the forest drowned it out. The wind howled, the trees whispered, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of something ancient and alive. I felt it then, the pull, stronger than ever. The whispers were no longer just distant voices. They were clear, urgent, as if the forest was speaking directly to me. "Come," it said, "come home." I stumbled forward, not sure why I obeyed, but unable to resist. My legs ached, my mind was clouded, but I moved as if some unseen force was guiding me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the woods. The trees closed in around me, their branches stretching like claws, as if the forest itself was closing in on me, trapping me in its web. And then I saw it. In the distance, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, there was a clearing. I couldn't see clearly at first, but as I drew closer I could make out shapes, figures standing in the center of the clearing, silhouetted against the darkness. I froze. There were more of them, more creatures, like the one I had seen before. They stood motionless, their dark forms blending with the shadows of the trees. Their glowing eyes pierced the darkness, staring directly at me. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched, waiting. And then I understood. They weren't creatures at all. Not really. They were part of the forest, part of the hunger. They were the forest's guardians, its hunters, its enforcers. They were waiting for me to arrive, waiting for the final moment, the moment when the forest would claim me completely. The ground beneath me shifted. I felt it before I saw it. The roots of the trees twisting and writhing like serpents beneath my feet, coiling around my legs, holding me in place. I tried to pull away, but the roots tightened, squeezing, pulling me deeper into the earth. The forest was dragging me down, pulling me into its depths, into its heart. And then the whispers grew louder. "You've come home," they said. "You belong to the forest now." I fought against the roots, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures in the clearing began to move, slowly at first, but then faster, their limbs stretching unnaturally, as if they were part of the very air itself. They circled me, moving closer, their eyes never leaving mine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The darkness was closing in, suffocating me. The forest was devouring me, body and soul. And the creatures, they weren't just hunting me anymore. They were part of the forest, and now I was part of it too. The hunger was unbearable. I could feel it tearing at me, inside and out, a gnawing, relentless force that would never be sated. The trees were alive, the ground was alive, and I was nothing more than a meal to the forest, a sacrifice to feed its insatiable hunger. I couldn't move. The roots had bound me too tightly. The creatures were close now, their faces blank, featureless, just empty spaces where eyes should have been. Their glowing eyes flickered in the darkness, as if they were feeding off my fear, off my despair. The leader of the creatures stepped forward. It was taller than the others, its form shifting in the darkness. Its eyes glowed brighter, and as it came closer, I could feel the heat radiating from it, like a fire burning in the dark. "You have been marked," it said, "and now you are ours." I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. The creature stepped closer, their cold hands reaching out to touch me, to drag me deeper into the darkness. And then I felt it, the final pull. The forest had claimed me. There was no escape now, no running, no fighting. I had become part of it. And as the creatures circled around me, as the darkness closed in, I realized with a chilling certainty that I was no longer a human. I was a part of the forest now, a piece of the endless hunger that consumed everything it touched. The forest had won, and there was no turning back. This was my final night. The hunt was over.
I don't know how much time has passed since that night. Days, weeks, months. Time has become irrelevant here in the heart of the forest. What's left of me doesn't know what the world outside feels like anymore. There's no sun, no sky, just endless darkness, trees that never end, and the same whispers that have been my only company. The hunger, the pull of the forest has consumed everything except me. I'm not sure what I am now. A shadow? A part of the forest? A lingering echo of the person I used to be. But I can still remember. I can still feel the sharp sting of the cold wind against my skin and the crushing weight of terror that chased me into the woods. I can still hear the growls, the whispers, the way the creatures surrounded me, claiming me like an inevitable death sentence. The last time I had control over my body, the last time I could think clearly, I had been dragged into this cursed place. The forest had swallowed me, its darkness closing around me like a tomb. But I never died, not in the way I expected. The creatures, those twisted, shapeless forms that stalked me in the night, they are here now, part of the endless web of life the forest weaves. The leader, the one that spoke to me, still lingers in the shadows. It stands like a sentinel, guarding the heart of this place, waiting for any other fool to step out of line. I can feel their eyes on me, even though they don't need to see me to know I'm here. We are all part of the same thing now. The forest, the creatures, and me, we are bound together by something older than time, older than anything the village could ever have known. They were right about the forest, about the rules, about the hunger. It isn't just a place, it's alive, a beast with an unquenchable thirst, a thing that doesn't care about who it takes or why or when. Once it marks you, once it claims you, there's no escape. It doesn't matter how hard you try to run. It doesn't matter if you obey the rules or break them. The forest is patient. It waits, it watches, and when the time comes, it pulls you in. But here's the part I didn't know. The forest doesn't just take, it gives too. It gives a twisted form of immortality, a kind of existence that's neither life nor death. We, the ones who have been claimed, are now part of the forest, woven into its roots, its branches, its very being. We don't die, not really. We become echoes of ourselves, shadows that linger between the living and the dead. And I can still feel it, the pull, the hunger. It's inside me, gnawing away at everything I once was. Every day that passes, I become more and more like the creatures I feared. I feel my body shift, twist, change. But it's not the physical change that terrifies me. No, it's the realization that I no longer want to escape.
The whispers, they're always here. They are part of me now. They tell me to feed, to grow, to take what belongs to the forest. They tell me that this is my purpose now, that the hunger is mine. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach, this insatiable craving, a need to claim others, to drag them into the woods the way I was once dragged. And I've begun to understand something. The forest never truly loses. It never truly gives up. It may take years, decades, even centuries, but the forest always wins. It always gets its tribute. And those who break the rules, they become its new eyes, its new voice, its new hunger. We are part of it now, as much as the trees, the roots, the ground beneath our feet. The forest is endless, and those of us who have been marked, we are its everlasting servants, forever trapped in the shadow of the trees. I used to wonder why the villagers didn't leave, why they stayed year after year knowing what the forest wanted. But now I see it. They were never free. None of us are. And I know now that I will never leave either. I will never escape the hunger. I will never escape the pull of the forest. But it's worse than that. I can hear it now. The voices, they've started to change. They've started to grow louder. There's something else out there, something new. It's calling to me. And it's not the forest. It's something darker, something older, something that has always been here, just beneath the surface. It's the truth that no one dared to speak of, the truth I'm only beginning to understand. The forest didn't mark me. It didn't claim me. It just woke me up. And now I'm part of something far worse than I could have imagined. I've become part of the endless hunger. I've become part of the forest. And maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for me all along. The hunt is never truly over. It's only just begun. And this time, it's not just me being hunted. It's everyone. If you're ever near a place like this, remember the rules. Don't step out of line. Don't break the curfew. The forest is always watching, always waiting. And when it marks you, there's no running, there's no escape. I should have known better, but now it's too late for me, and it might already be too late for you. If you're ever curious enough to break the rules, just remember, the forest never forgets, it never lets go. And once it has you, it will hunt you forever. If you enjoyed my story, stay tuned for the next one. But remember, stay safe, stay inside. The darkness out there, it's always watching.